you and I take a good close look at aerodynamics. The FAA wants you as a private pilot to have some idea of when an airplane is going to fly and when the airplane is going to stall and what makes it fly and what makes it stall. Well, if you study this beautiful example of aerodynamics for a while, pretty soon you gather some insight to it and you are going to know exactly what makes an airplane fly after studying this for a while, and I'm sure you've figured it out by now. What makes an airplane fly is money. And with enough money, you can even do something like this. Isn't that incredible? Well, obviously that's done with thrusters that point down, not at all like most little airplanes fly. So let's you and I take a look at a little airplane and see how it flies. First of all, there are four forces acting on an aircraft. The FAA calls these four aerodynamic forces, and those four forces are thrust, which makes the airplane go forward, and drag, which tends to slow it down, and weight, which wants to make it go down, and lift, which wants to make it go up. So the four forces acting on an aircraft are thrust, drag, lift, and weight. Now let's assume that you and I have this airplane flying along in straight and level flight. It's not changing speed and it's not changing direction. Well, the FAA has a term for that, and that term is that the airplane is in unaccelerated flight. That means it's not changing speed or not changing direction. Now the FAA says, all right, let's assume that this airplane is in unaccelerated flight. What is the relationship of these four aerodynamic forces? And the answer is they are in equilibrium in unaccelerated flight. Now, equilibrium means thrust is equal to drag, and they are not changing. Lift is equal to weight, and they are not changing. So in straight and level, unaccelerated flight, these four forces are in equilibrium. They are equal to each other and not changing. So the relationship in straight and level flight is lift is equal to weight, and thrust is equal to drag. Now you've got some idea of the four forces on the aircraft. Let's you and I talk about what actually creates the lift that makes an airplane fly. We can refer back to a guy named Bernoulli, I guess I should say, who I am told was Swiss, who did some experiments. And what he did is he forced moving air through a narrow point in a tube. Now a narrow point in a tube is called a venturi. And he put some gauges in here and he measured the air pressure as it went through this narrow point in the tube. Now he found what I think is really fascinating things when he did this. What Bernoulli found is that when the air got to a narrow point in a tube, it has to speed up. And the interesting thing he found is with the gauge, he measures the air pressure where the air is going the fastest. And what Bernoulli found is at points where the air is going the fastest, the pressure is the least. There is a low pressure inside this venturi. Now, if we remove 1/2 of the venturi and take it away, you're going to find now we have an airplane wing. And you'll find exactly the same thing occurs in an airplane wing. The air going over the top of the wing gets forced out of the way. It resists compression. By the way, if you put air in a gallon jug and squeeze it, you can compress it. But free air is incompressible. So if you force air out of the way, it doesn't compress at all. What it does do is speed up to get out of the way. And Bernoulli's law says, and here's the trick, Bernoulli's law says at places where the air is going the fastest, like over the top of the wing, the air pressure is less. So over the wing of an airplane, what you really have is a low pressure area up over the top of the wing and a relative high pressure area underneath the wing. And that's that pressure differential that creates lift. That's what makes the airplane fly. You have low pressure over the top of the wing, high pressure area underneath the wing. And that pressure differential will occur anytime the air is flowing smoothly over the surface of the wing and conforming to the surface of the wing. Now let's you and I take a look at a couple terms the FAA wants you to know about. First of all, if you take a look at an aircraft wing, and if you draw a line from the trailing edge of the wing up here to the leading edge, that line is roughly called the chord line, and it points the direction the wing is pointed. Now if the wing is going this way, the wind will be coming from the opposite direction. They call that the relative wind because it's the wind relative or in relation to the wing itself. And so if the wing is going this way, the relative wind will be coming the opposite direction. Now this angle between the chord line of the wing and the relative wind is called the angle of attack. And the FAA wants you to know that, and they call that an acute angle, meaning it's the small way around, not the big way around. The small angle here is called the angle of attack. Now the FAA is going to ask you that terminology question, so let's you and I take a look at figure 1 back in the back of the book and the FAA pages back there, and they're going to ask you what is acute angle A here? Well, here we have the chord line of the wing, here we have the relative wind. That angle is called the angle of attack. So that's one of the things you need to know is angle A is called the angle of attack. Now, The angle of attack determines how much lift there will be on a wing. Let's you and I take a look at a wing actually flying in an airplane. Here's an airplane flying along, and we have it in a wind tunnel with smoke going over it. And as you increase the angle of attack, the lift gets greater. But however, I said there's only lift as long as the air conforms with the surface of the wing. Now, when you get the angle of attack so high, the air can no longer conform with the surface of the wing. And instead of flowing smoothly over the surface of the wing, it backfills and burbles and eddies. Lift is destroyed and the aircraft is said to have stalled. Now let's take a look at a close-up picture of exactly what we just saw there. We increase the angle of attack of this wing, and as it increases, we change the angle of attack. The relative wind can no longer conform to the surface of the wing, and when it separates from the surface of the wing, and then it continues and burbles and backfills and eddies, you're going to find that lift is destroyed and the aircraft is said to have stalled. Now, an airplane stalls at a specific angle of attack. The exact angle of attack at which the air can no longer conform to the surface of the wing is really designed into the wing. So an airplane stalls at the same angle of attack regardless of the gross weight of the airplane. So at what angle of attack does an airplane stall at? Always, for the particular airplane and configuration of the wing, always at the same angle of attack. So that's one of the things you need to know. Now, as you go to higher altitudes, there's thin air at high altitudes, but that thin air affects your indicated airspeed, your airspeed indicator, in exactly the same way it affects the wing. So would you stall at the same indicated airspeed at high altitude or lower? And you see it right now. The indicated airspeed at which an airplane stalls will remain the same regardless of the altitude. There's thin air at higher altitudes, but there's thin air for both the wing and the pitot tube, and they're affected exactly the same way. So it's the angle of attack that makes an airplane stall. Now, normally an airplane will stall at a specific indicated airspeed because unless you have some load factor on the airplane, G forces on the airplane, it'll stall at a given angle of attack, and that angle of attack will always occur at a specific indicated airspeed. Now let's talk about spins, and this is an interesting example of spins right here. Spins are really exciting flight. That's fun, isn't it? All right, well, maybe it isn't fun for some people, but that's a spin. Now they're going to ask you on the test, what do you have to do to spin an airplane? Well, in order to spin an airplane, first it must be stalled. So you need to know if you want to avoid this, want to avoid spinning an airplane, you need to avoid stalling that airplane. Now they're going to ask you when an airplane is spinning, are both wings stalled or just one wing stalled? And the answer is, regardless of which direction the airplane is spinning, to the left or to the right, both wings are stalled. Why is it spinning, you might want to ask? Well, the reason it's spinning is because one wing is more stalled than the other, but both are stalled. So during a spin to the left, the FAA will ask you on the test, how are the wings? And the answer is both wings are stalled. Anything that interferes with the smooth flow of air over the surface of the wing will change the way it flies. For instance, if you have frost all over the surface of the wing, you need to remove that frost because it can disrupt the smooth flow of air over the wing, and it will adversely affect its lifting capability. So if you get out to the airport and there's frost all over the wings of the aircraft, you need to take something plastic like a credit card or some credit card you want to get rid of because it'll break it up, and just scrape off all the frost off the wings of the aircraft. Now, frost which has not been removed from the wings of the airplane before flight may prevent the airplane from becoming airborne at normal takeoff speed. So you really have a problem, and you must remove the frost because it can cause the airplane to stall at a high speed and also stall at an unpredictable speed, so you have no idea exactly when the airplane is going to stall. You and I both know that when we're taking off and climbing out in an airplane, we have to hold lots of right rudder. Here's a good example of a guy holding lots of right rudder when he's taking off here. Now the question is, why do you have to hold right rudder when you're climbing out and taking off? And the FAA wants you to understand that really well. Well, the reason you have to hold right rudder is the airplane has a left turning tendency. And the reason the airplane has a left turning tendency, one of those reasons is P-factor. Now, P-factor has nothing to do with how long you've flown since you've gone to the bathroom. No, that's not what it has to do with. P-factor has to do with the pitch of the prop blades. And when an airplane is in slow flight, like after takeoff or when you're climbing out, the nose of the airplane is pointed way up in the air like so, but the airplane is going forward on an angle about like this. That means the relative wind is coming from the opposite direction. And that means the propeller is not pointed directly into the relative wind. And the right prop blade, which goes down, winds up taking a great big bite out of that relative wind. The left prop blade, which ascends or goes up, takes a much smaller bite out of that relative wind, and that means the airplane wants to turn to the left, and that is called P-factor, or asymmetric propeller loading. And it causes the airplane to yaw to the left when you're at high angles of attack. And they call that P factor or asymmetric propeller loading. Now, the left turning tendency of an airplane is caused by, the FAA wants you to know, the propeller blade on the right producing more thrust than the blade on the left. Now, that left turning tendency is sometimes referred to as torque, T-O-R-Q-U-E, and they're going to ask you, when is torque the greatest, at high power or low power? Well, the propeller and the engine horsepower are what makes the airplane want to turn to the left, so at high power, definitely. High airspeed or low airspeed? And the answer is low airspeed, because that's when you have these high angles of attack with the nose pointed up in the air and the right prop blade is taking a bigger bite out of the air. And high angle of attack or low angle of attack, and the answer is high angle of attack. Now, normally, at cruise speed, an airplane does not want to turn to the left. And the reason for that is the manufacturer has built some aerodynamic compensations into the airplane. For instance, there's a little bigger angle of attack built right into the left wing and a little smaller angle of attack built into the right wing. And the tail is canted a little bit to the right. And these aerodynamic compensations counterbalance the left-hand turning tendency of the aircraft. But when the airplane is slow, there's not enough air over the wings and tail to counterbalance that left turning tendency. And also, when you have high power, there's more of a left turning tendency. So, torque effect, that's the left turning tendency, is greatest when? Well, it's greatest at low airspeed, high power, and high angles of attack. Now, let's talk about what makes an airplane stable and when an airplane will be stable. Now, if an airplane is stable, it'll fly along with very little effort to control. So an airplane that is said to be inherently stable will require less effort to control if it's inherently stable. Now, when we're talking about stability of an airplane on the FAA written exam, normally talking about longitudinal stability. Now, longitudinal stability means pitch stability. Does the airplane tend to pitch up or down and get out of control, pitching up and down? Well, most airplanes are built so that if you pull up on the elevator and pull the nose up and let go, the airplane will return to equilibrium. And if it oscillates, the oscillations will get smaller and smaller and smaller. That's called longitudinal stability. Now, what determines the longitudinal stability of the airplane? Well, the location of the center of gravity in relation to the center of lift. Let's take a look at it. Most little airplanes are designed so that the center of gravity is actually in front of the center of lift. Now watch what would happen if you pick this airplane up by a string here at the center of lift. Well, if you pick it up by a string right here, the center of gravity is in front of the center of lift, and the airplane would nose down. Well, most airplanes actually are designed that way, so why aren't they nosing down all the time? Well, because the tail actually has an aerodynamic downforce on most airplanes. The tail is actually trying to fly down. Now, let's take a look at what that does for you. Here you are flying along, and if you're flying at a speed that is just right for this airplane, this aerodynamic downforce on the tail exactly balances the weight being in front of the center of pressure, and therefore the airplane is flying along just in balanced condition like so. Now let's assume this airplane for some reason gets a little bit slow. That means there'd be less air over the tail. Now what's going to happen is the tail will come up, the nose will go down, the airplane will dive and pick up speed, and the airplane will now have more air over the tail, the nose will come right back up and return to its original speed. So this aerodynamic downforce on the tail helps make the airplane stable as far as pitch and speed are concerned. So the reason this Piper Archer is flying along in straight and level flight, even though it's just a little bit bumpy, is that the airplane is inherently stable. And the reason it's inherently stable is there actually is an aerodynamic downforce on this tail. This tail is trying to fly down. And the reason the tail is trying to fly down, well, the center of gravity is in front of the center of pressure. Now, you can't change the center of pressure much, but can you change where the center of gravity is in an airplane? You certainly can. All you have to do is load bricks in the baggage compartment. You can move that center of gravity around. And when you're doing that, you're changing the stability characteristics of the airplane. For instance, let's you and I move the center of gravity further rearward. Now there's less aerodynamic downforce on the tail. It's the aerodynamic downforce on the tail that makes the airplane stable, so therefore the airplane is less stable. So let's assume you load an airplane further aft. Do you change the stability of the aircraft? You certainly do. Let's load the aircraft to the most aft CG limit back here. Will the airplane be more or less stable? Well, if you load that airplane to the most aft CG limit, the airplane will be less stable at all speeds. How about you load the airplane aft of the allowable rear CG limit? What would happen then? Well, if an airplane is loaded aft of the aft CG limit, the pilot just might experience difficulty in the stability of the aircraft and in recovery from a stalled condition. Because if you have the CG too far aft, you might have difficulty getting the nose down for recovery from the stall, and therefore you fall all the way down to the ground tail first. Personally, I will never fly an airplane loaded aft of the rear CG limit again. All right, let's take a look at now what happens in an airplane when you have air flowing over the tail. When you're flying along normally, most airplanes, except for T-tail type airplanes, you have the air from the propeller flying over the tail. Now, would that increase or decrease the down tendency, the tendency of the tail to fly down? And the answer is it would increase the tendency of the tail to fly down. So if you remove the power, for instance, you reduce power and you have less air flying over the aircraft from the propeller slipstream, what's going to happen to the aircraft? And the answer is it will have a tendency to nose down because it'll reduce the downforce on the tail. So the nose down pitch tendency of an airplane when power is reduced, except for T-tail airplanes, occurs because the downwash on the elevators from the propeller slipstream is reduced, and also because elevator effectiveness is reduced because there's less air going over the elevators. Now, I said earlier, it's pretty easy to move the center of gravity around in an aircraft. I mentioned putting bricks in a baggage compartment. I didn't say one thing about putting the mother-in-law in the back seat. I didn't say anything about that. But anyway, you can move the center of gravity pretty easily. But I said earlier, it's very difficult to move the center of pressure around very much. But actually, I lied to you because you can move the center of pressure. All you have to do is put the flaps down, you increase the lift at the back of the wing, and the center of pressure moves aft. Or you can put the airplane in a very low angle of attack, like when you're flying fast, and when you're at very low angle of attack, the center of pressure moves aft, and you once again have more distance between the center of gravity and the center of pressure and more downforce in the tail, and at very high speeds, the airplane becomes more stable. But if you change the angle of attack by flying very, very slow, now you have the nose pitch way up in the air and the center of pressure moves forward, and there's less distance between the center of gravity and the center of pressure. And when you're flying at very high angles of attack, there's less downforce in the tail and the airplane is less stable. So just like changing the center of gravity, changing the center of pressure, mostly by changing your angle of attack, will affect the aerodynamic balance, controllability, and stability of the airplane. Now let's talk about what makes an airplane turn and how you and I can turn an airplane. First of all, you and I both know the way you turn an airplane is you bank the airplane. Now what banking the airplane does is it tilts the lift, because lift is up through the ceiling of an aircraft. When an airplane is in straight and level flight, all the lift is right straight up through the ceiling of the aircraft and all the lift is vertical. But when you tilt this airplane, or bank the airplane I should say, you tilt the lift. And then you now have a horizontal component of lift, and the horizontal component of lift is what makes the airplane turn. So they're going to ask you on the test, what is it that makes an airplane turn? And the answer is the horizontal component of lift is what makes the airplane turn, right there, the horizontal component of lift. Now, before we get done with this drawing, let's you and I cover in great detail how you turn an airplane. First of all, you have an airplane flying in straight and level flight. All the lift is through the ceiling of the aircraft. All the lift is right straight up. Now, what you do to bank the airplane for the turn is you put the aileron down. You put the left aileron down, and that'll increase the angle of attack on this left wing. The wing will go up. But because you increase angle of attack, you increase lift, you also increase drag, the wing will start to go back in the wrong direction. And look what happens when you put the right aileron up. You put the right aileron up, you decrease lift, and because you decrease lift, you decrease drag, and that wing wants to go forward. In other words, what happens when you put the ailerons down for a turn or use aileron control to make the airplane turn, the airplane actually wants to yaw the wrong direction. And it's a design feature of airplanes. They haven't been able to design it completely out of airplanes, and that's why you use rudder in a turn, just to correct for that adverse yaw. Because it's the banking of the airplane and the tilting of the lift and the horizontal component of lift that makes the airplane turn. And what do you use rudder for? You use rudder to correct for the yaw, to control the yaw when you're turning an airplane. Now, notice when you bank this airplane, you now have not only to support the weight of the aircraft when you're banking it for a turn, but you also have to support centrifugal force. The wings have to support that also. And so you increase the amount of load the wings have to carry. Well, to compensate for that, you actually have to use a little back pressure on the wheel and increase the angle of attack a little bit, or otherwise, when you bank the airplane will descend. So you do use back pressure when you pull back on the wheel in a turn to keep the airplane from descending, because you increase the load on the aircraft. Now, that load that you have on the wings of the aircraft is measured in terms of G's. G's is the force you're putting on the airplane. If you're in a screaming dive on the airplane, you pull back on the wheel, you might feel a few G's. So G's is load factor on the aircraft. Load factor is measured in G's, and that stands for times the force of gravity. Turns are a basic flight maneuver that increase the load factor on the aircraft compared to straight and level flight, because when you're turning this airplane, you're compensating for centrifugal force, and you're going to feel some load factor on an aircraft. So let's assume you do an approach to a stall in an airplane, and you're in a bank. Will, if being in a bank, cause you to stall at a higher or lower speed? Well, the answer is, during an approach to a stall, an increase in load factor will cause the airplane to stall at a higher airspeed. It's as if the airplane were heavier, because the wings have to support more weight. Now, the increased load factor in an airplane, either from pulling out of a dive or in a real steep turn, can place stress on the airframe greater than it's designed to handle. If you do this at a very high speed, you can actually put too much stress on the wings of the aircraft. Now, what causes that stress, of course, is the G's you're putting on the airplane. If you slow the airplane down, the wings will stall first. So how do you protect the airplane? By slowing it down. Now, the FAA is going to ask you just how much load are you going to put on the wings of an aircraft during a turn. So let's you and I take a look at a load factor chart. They're going to ask you about this on the test. And to do that, let's you and I take a look at figure 2 back here in the back of the book. And they're going to say, let's assume that you put the airplane in a 30-degree bank angle. Now, a 30-degree bank angle, let's assume the airplane weighs 3,300 pounds to begin with. Well, when you put this airplane in a 30-degree bank angle, there's a little bit of increase in load factor. By the way you read this is you go to the bank angle down here at the bottom of the chart, which is 30 degrees, go up to this load factor line, stop and make a dot, and read across to the left and read your load factor. Load factor in this case would be about, I'd say about 1.2 G's. Well, let's take a look at the numbers. If the airplane weighed 3,300 pounds in the first place, and you multiply that times 1.2 G's, now you're going to find out the airplane weighs 3,960 pounds. You just punch that out with your calculator. Let's do another one. Let's take a look at another airplane. Let's put this airplane into a bank and see what happens. This time you have the airplane into a 60-degree bank. In this particular case, in a 60-degree bank, we'll start down at the bottom of the chart at 60 degrees, read up till we hit the load factor line, read off to the left. We see that we're going to put a load factor of 2 on the airplane. That's 2 G's. It means the airplane and everything in the airplane will weigh twice as much. Now, if this airplane weighed 2,300 pounds to begin with, and we put this airplane under a load factor of 2, let's see what's going to happen to the airplane. Okay, you have 2,300 pounds, you have a load factor of 2, and now you find out the airplane weighs 2 times 2,300 pounds, or 4,600 pounds. You guys are getting on to it. Let's do one more. They're going to ask you about this on the test. This time, they're going to have an airplane in a 45-degree bank. So let's take a look at this airplane in a 45-degree bank. We're taking a look at figure 2, by the way. So you start down here at 45 degrees, read up to you at the curved load factor line, stop and make a dot, and read off to the left. In about a 45-degree bank, if I look at that very, very carefully, I'm going to say we've got about 1.4 G's on the airplane. So now let's take a look at an airplane we'll say that weighs 4,500 pounds, and we put 1.4 G's on this airplane. Well, if it weighed 4,500 pounds to begin with, you multiply that times 1.4, and now the wings have to support 6,300 pounds of weight because you have the G's on the airplane. So the question I want to ask you again, can you put too much load on the wings simply by rolling the airplane into steep a bank? And the answer is yes, you can. Well, what determines the amount of excess load that can be imposed on the wings? And the answer is the speed of the airplane. If you slow the airplane down and put a lot of load on the wings, the airplane will stall. But if you have the airplane at very high speed and put a lot of excess load on the wings will become damaged. So the amount of excess load that can be imposed on the wings of an aircraft depends on the speed of the airplane. Let's you and I take a look at flaps. Why do you put flaps in an airplane? Well, the reason you put flaps in an airplane is so that you can increase the drag on the airplane. You also increase lift, but mostly you increase drag. And what that allows you to do, what is the purpose of wing flaps? Well, what that allows you to do is to make a steeper approach to landing without increasing airspeed. You increase the drag so you can go down steeper without increasing airspeed. Now let's you and I take a look at some limitations that you have to observe when you're flying the airplane, things you have to be careful of. For instance, one of the things you have to be careful of is don't put this landing gear down when the airplane's flying too fast. It's bad on the landing gear doors, bad on the landing gear itself. There is a speed you need to know about that, and that is called VLE. It's normal to abbreviate these speeds, and that's maximum speed that the landing gear can be extended. These are called V speeds. V stands for the velocity of the airplane. VLE is the maximum speed you can fly with the landing gear extended. Now, you would look up this speed normally in the airplane flight manual and see what the airplane flight manual says is the VLE of this airplane. The FAA wants you to know VLE stands for the maximum speed you can fly with the landing gear extended. Now let's assume you're taking off in an airplane, and as you take off, you'd like to clear a 50-foot obstacle. How could you have an airport without a 50-foot obstacle? Well, if you want to take off and clear an obstacle, what you want to do is climb at the airspeed that gives you the greatest gain in altitude in the shortest distance during takeoff. That's called the best angle of climb speed. There is a V speed for that, and that is called VX. That's just an abbreviation for the best angle of climb speed, and that's the best altitude over distance, VX. And you can see right here that yes, indeed, you would like to climb at the best altitude over distance over the ground. But what if you want to get the most altitude you can get over time? Well, then you would want to climb at the best rate of climb speed, and that has an abbreviation also. An abbreviation for best rate of climb speed, a V speed for it, is VY. That's the best speed, best altitude over time. That's called best rate of climb, and that's VY. X is angle mathematically almost all the time, and Y is over time. When you're flying in turbulence like this, another speed you need to know about is maneuvering speed. Now, maneuvering speed is an important airspeed limitation that is not color-coded on airspeed indicators. Where do you find maneuver speed? It's placarded on the panel of the aircraft, or it's in the airplane flight manual, but it's not shown on the airspeed indicator. Now, in severe turbulence, you'd like to reduce the airplane to maneuver speed or below. Why? Well, maneuver speed is the maximum speed at which you can reach forward, grab the wheel, jerk it back in your lap as hard as you want, and not cause structural damage to the aircraft. Scare the daylights out of everybody on board the airplane, but it will not cause structural damage to the aircraft. And the reason for that is if you can hold the airplane to maneuver speed or below, the airplane will stall before the wings become damaged. So maneuver speed is a speed you would like to slow the airplane to if you get into turbulence. In severe turbulence then, the airplane speed should be reduced to maneuvering speed or slightly below. Now, the way you really do this in real life is you set up a power setting that you know will get you maneuver speed or slightly below. Then you maintain level flight attitude and you allow minor variations in airspeed and altitude. You do not want to chase the airspeed. And the reason for that is when an airplane's wings come off while flying in severe turbulence, 9 times out of 10, it's not the turbulence that tears the wings off the airplane. It's the pilot that tears the wings off the airplane by having the nose get down and pulls back on the wheel and tears the wings and tail off the airplane. So if you get into severe turbulence, what you want to do is set up a power setting that you know will get you maneuver speed or slightly below. Then maintain level flight attitude and allow minor variations in airspeed and altitude. Let's you and I take a look at figure 4 back in the back of the book, and what I want to show you here is an airspeed indicator. And what I want to point out is that on the airspeed indicator there are colored arcs or markings that give you some of the operating limitations of the aircraft. For instance, there is the white arc, and the white arc is the flap operating range. In this case it's about 60 to 100 miles per hour, and the white arc starts at the bottom at power off stalling speed with the flaps and landing gear in the landing position. By the way, there's a V speed for that, and that's called VSO. That's velocity of stall in the landing position for landing gear and flaps. And it's also defined as stalling or minimum steady flight speed in the landing configuration. Minimum steady flight speed, that's stalling speed in landing configuration, that's VSO. So the white arc starts here at power off stalling speed with the flaps and landing gear in the landing position, and then it goes on up up to the maximum speed you can fly with the flaps extended. And that's referred to as VFE, velocity flaps extended. And that's the top of the white arc, the maximum speed you can fly with the flaps extended. It's about 100 in this particular case. And that's the maximum flaps extended speed. And now we have the white arc. All right, that's the flap operating range. Let's you and I take a look at the green arc. Now, the green arc is referred to as the normal operating range, and it begins at the bottom with power off stalling speed with the flaps and landing gear in the retracted position this particular time. And so this is gear and flaps up, stalling speed, the bottom of the green arc. And this green arc or normal operating range goes on up here in this particular case until you get to maximum structural cruising speed. Now, maximum structural cruising speed is a speed above which anything more than light turbulence could cause structural damage to the aircraft. So this is called the normal operating range right here, and it goes from, once again, the bottom of the green arc, which is stalling speed with the gear and flaps up, to maximum structural cruising speed, the speed above which anything more than light turbulence could cause structural damage to the aircraft. Now, speeds above maximum structural cruising speed are shown on the airspeed indicator by the yellow arc, and that's the caution range. And the caution range begins at maximum structural cruising speed, in this particular case it's about 165, and it goes up to what is known as the red radial line right here, and that is never exceed speed. In this particular case it's about 208. And VNE is the abbreviation for never exceed speed, velocity never exceed. Now, never exceed speed is the maximum speed the airplane can be flown even in calm air. But if you do have the courage for that sort of thing, you can, in perfectly calm air, take the airplane right up to redline. So you see that these colored arcs and markings on the airspeed indicator have a great deal of meaning to you, and they tell you, in this particular case, the operating limitations of the aircraft. Now let's take a look at wake turbulence, or wingtip vortices. Now, wingtip vortices occur because anytime an airplane is flying, there's high pressure underneath the wing, low pressure area on top of the wing, so the air from underneath the wing tries to make its way around the wingtip and join that low pressure area on top of the wing. Well, the problem is by the time these molecules make their way around the wingtip, the wing is gone. It isn't there anymore. So what you really get is these wake turbulence or wingtip vortices that come after the aircraft. Anytime an aircraft is producing lift, you'll have these wingtip vortices like so, and they occur worse when the airplane is at high angles of attack at the wingtips. Now, would you be at high angles of attack at the wingtips when the airplane is heavy or light? Well, when the airplane's heavy, you'd have the biggest angle of attack. How about when the gear and flaps up or down? Well, when the flaps are down, the airplane pitches down just a little bit, and the angle of attack at the wingtips is less. But when you remove the flaps, reduce the flaps, the airplane pitches up, and the angle of attack at the wingtips is higher. And when the airplane is slow, the angle of attack at the wingtips is greatest. So when do you have the greatest wake turbulence behind an airplane? Well, when the airplane is heavy, clean, and slow. Now, these vortices are a danger to you when you're flying in a little airplane and you're following a bigger airplane, because these can actually roll you upside down. Now, if you're flying at 2,000 feet and you get caught in wake turbulence and do an inadvertent roll, it scares the daylights out of you. But at 50 feet above ground level, it can ruin your whole doggone day. So you see this Boeing 747 equipped with smoke generators shows you how these vortices affect you as you're flying along in a little airplane following this airplane, and they can ruin your whole doggone day when you're in short final if you don't know how to behave around wingtip vortices. So the important thing to know is to know how these vortices work. First of all, they tend to sink behind the airplane. So if you want to avoid the vortices of a big airplane, you would want to fly above the altitude of the aircraft that's generating the wake turbulence. So they tend to sink down below behind the airplane. Also, you should need to know that when you get near the ground, they spread apart. So here you have the airplane generating lift. Anytime that there's lift on the wings, you have the wake turbulence. They sink behind the aircraft and they spread apart. And the wind condition that requires maximum caution when you're avoiding wake turbulence is a light quartering tailwind. Now here's why. Let's assume that these vortices drift apart, as we said earlier, at about a rate of, we'll say, 5 knots. And let's assume you have a 5-knot quartering tailwind. Well, you can see what would happen. This upwind vortex could be held right over the runway. The downwind vortex would be blown away, and that's no problem. So, and you have a light quartering tailwind, the upwind vortex could be right over the runway, and that could be your most dangerous situation. So around an airport, watch out for a light quartering tailwind as far as vortices are concerned. Now, let's assume you're landing behind a large aircraft. What should you do? Well, what you should do is fly above the landing aircraft's path of flight, because his vortices are generated right here. They sink below the aircraft like so, and you want to land beyond the point where his nose wheel touches the ground. Now, lift is on his wings until his nose wheel touches the ground. So when you're landing behind a large aircraft, the pilot should avoid wake turbulence by staying above the large aircraft's final path and landing beyond the aircraft's touchdown point, like so. Now, let's assume you're departing behind a heavy aircraft. Let's take a look at what you do here. As soon as that big aircraft's nose wheel leaves the ground, his vortices begin, and they drift behind the aircraft and descend like so. So when you're departing behind a heavy aircraft, the pilot should avoid wake turbulence by maneuvering the aircraft above and upwind of the heavy aircraft, like so. So if you're in a Cessna 150, you'd like to outclimb this 727, you'll play heck out climbing a 727, so you want to avoid his path of flight by turning away. Now, here's an airplane just about to come into ground effect. Now, the thing you need to know about ground effect is an airplane actually flies better within about a wingspan of the ground, and that can cause it to float and float and float and float and float. And that is one of the problems with ground effect. Now, why does an airplane fly better when it's within about a wingspan of the ground? Well, here's why. Normally, when an airplane is flying, we talked about the fact that there's high pressure underneath the wing and relative low pressure on top of the wing. And we also said that anytime you have this pressure differential, some of the molecules from the high pressure area are going to try and make their way around the wingtip and destroy lift on top of the wings. Well, anytime an airplane is flying, some of the lift on top of the wing is actually being destroyed in that fashion. But when an airplane gets within about a wingspan of the ground interferes with the ability of the air to make its way around the wingtip. And some of the lift that would have been destroyed is no longer being destroyed when the airplane's within about a wingspan of the ground, and that is called ground effect. So on the FAA written exam, you need to know that ground effect is the result of the interference of the surface of the earth with the airflow patterns about an airplane. And an airplane actually flies more efficiently in ground effect. Now, two big problems in ground effect. First of all, if you're taking off in ground effect may result in your becoming airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed. Now, the airplane will fly, but it may have a hard time climbing out of ground effect. And therefore, if you take off too soon, you can actually wind up using a lot more runway to get airborne. So ground effect may result in becoming airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed, and this is really a problem at high altitude airports. They had a guy who took off one time at Lake Tahoe. It has about 5,000 foot altitude. Sometimes it gets up to 90, maybe 100 degrees at Lake Tahoe. Tremendous density altitudes at Lake Tahoe. Well, this guy took off at Lake Tahoe, and his pilot technique for taking off had always been to look outside the window, see if the runway was going by fast enough. And he'd say, oh, that looks fast enough for me, and he'd jerk back on the wheel and pull the airplane off. Now, the problem is the airplane could fly in ground effect, but there's no way in the world the guy could make the airplane climb that way. So what happens to him is he flies the whole length of the runway about 5 feet above the ground and hits a tree at the other end. That guy staggered out of that airplane and said, ground effect caused that accident. Well, in a sense, he's right, but it's not ground effect that caused that accident. Ground effect doesn't cause accidents. What causes accidents in airplanes? Pilots cause accidents, and the pilot caused that accident by allowing the airplane to become airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed. Now, let's talk about it. Would you say ground effect increases or decreases lift? Well, it increases lift. The airplane flies better in ground effect. And does ground effect increase or decrease drag? It decreases drag. And so therefore, if you have any excess speed on landing, you're going to have considerable floating. So could ground effect cause floating? Sure it could, because the induced drag decreases. Therefore, any excess speed at the point of flare may cause considerable floating. So ground effect causes floating on landing, and floating due to ground effect will be most realized during an approach to land when you're less than how much above the ground? Less than 1 wingspan above the surface. So ground effect can cause you to become airborne too soon, and you're going to have floating on landing when the aircraft is less than the 1 wingspan above the surface. Well, now, believe it or not, you and I have covered what the FAA wants you to know about aerodynamics on the FAA written exam. So now you're qualified to understand how with just a little bit of money you can make the airplane do something like this. All right, let's see if you and I can make some sense out of aircraft instruments. And boy, I tell you what, when the instruments are doing stuff like this, it can be very, very confusing. And the FAA will ask you some questions on the FAA written exam and try and confuse you a little further. So let's see if you and I can make some sense out of these aircraft instruments. And we're going to lead off by talking about the attitude indicator. Now, a lot of pilots like to refer to the attitude indicator as the artificial horizon because it really is just an artificial horizon that tells you what that horizon is doing outside the aircraft. In this case, it's banking a lot, I tell you that. Now, you can think of the attitude indicator as the artificial horizon. The attitude indicator is not, as some pilots believe, a light that comes on, beeps, and shows the pilot has now a bad attitude. No, that's not what it is at all. It's the artificial horizon. Okay, let's take a look at what the FAA is going to ask you about the attitude indicator on the FAA written exam. And to do that, let's take a look in the FAA pages back on Figure 7 back there. And here is the attitude indicator. And the question they're going to ask you about the attitude indicator on the FAA written exam is how do you determine the direction of bank from an attitude indicator? And it can be confusing, and the way you do it is you note the relationship of the miniature airplane, which is C, to the deflecting horizon bar, which is B. So the answer in the test is note the relationship of the miniature airplane, which is C, to the deflecting horizon bar, which is B. Now, if you take a look at this, you can see that this airplane right now is in a right bank because the right wing is below the horizon. And that's the way the picture would look outside the window of the aircraft. All right, now let's take a look at another question they're going to ask you about Figure 7 here. And they're going to say, all right, let's assume that you're in straight and level flight and you want to adjust the attitude indicator. What is the proper adjustment? Well, what you can do is you can turn this knob and move the little miniature airplane up and down. And what you want to do is make sure the miniature airplane is just with the nose of the aircraft right on the horizon like so. So on the test, what they say you do is you use this knob to align the miniature airplane to the horizon bar. And all you're trying to do is adjust this airplane so that when you actually are in level flight, that the artificial horizon, or the attitude indicator, the FAA calls it, actually shows level flight. Now, the heading indicator looks just like this. A lot of pilots call it the DG, or directional gyro, because that's what it is. The heading indicator is a gyroscopically stabilized compass so that it shows your heading. Here's 30 degrees that we're going through right there. Now, they're going to ask you, as a pilot, what do you have to do to receive accurate indications from the heading indicator? All right, now let's take a look at Figure 6 because they're going to direct you to Figure 6 when they ask you this question on the FAA written exam. And what you need to know is to receive accurate indications during flight from a heading indicator like this, what you have to do is align the instrument periodically with the compass as the gyro precesses. So this instrument, the heading indicator, must be periodically realigned, I should say, with the magnetic compass. Now, the reason for that is it wanders off due to gyroscopic precession, so you kind of have to line it up every now and then. Now, the reason you have a heading indicator in an aircraft is the compass is not accurate during certain times when you're flying the airplane, and so you have a habit of looking at the heading indicator because the compass is bouncing around. We'll talk more about the errors in the compass. You and I take a look at another instrument, and that's the turn coordinator. Turn coordinator, of course, shows you whether or not you're coordinated. When the ball's in the center, you're coordinated. And it also tells you when you're banking or turning the aircraft. We'll talk about how that works, and to make sense out of how that works, let's you and I take a look at an airplane with a gyro in it. First of all, here's the way the gyro was arranged back in the original instrument, the turn and bank indicator. That was the needle and ball. Now, the turn coordinator is a little different. It has a picture of an airplane in it, and we'll talk about what the difference is and how they work. Here is the old turn and bank indicator arrangement, and you have a gyro aligned with the axis of the aircraft, and when the airplane yaws, and that means the nose comes around and moves through the horizon, you would find that this gyro would attempt to be disturbed, and it would fight back and have precession as it fought back, and the needle would measure the rate of precession and tell you your rate of turn. But someone said, look, that's a problem because this doesn't tell you when you're banking the airplane. It only gives you an indication when the nose starts to move through the horizon. And one of the problems is that you can get an airplane in a very steep bank, and if the nose hadn't started to move through the horizon yet, it doesn't give you any indication. Well, they said it'd be nice if you had some kind of instrument that not only told you when the nose had actually started turning through the horizon, but it also gave you an indication when you're about to lose control of the airplane and banking it. And somebody says, well, we could do that. Here's how we're doing. We're just going to tilt this gyro up at an angle like so. Now, when you start to bank the airplane, it'll move this gyro's axis. And when the gyro axis attempts to move, it fights back and gives you an indication. And that's how the turn coordinator works. It not only tells you when you start moving the nose through the horizon, movement about the yaw axis, but it also tells you movement about the roll axis, and it gives you an earlier indication. So what axes, they're going to ask you on the test, does the turn coordinator give you an indication of movement about? And the answer is the yaw axis and the roll axes. So let's go back one more time and take a look at that turn coordinator. And when you see that turn coordinator, you now know that the turn coordinator is not the needle and ball, but it's the ball with the picture of the airplane in it. And when you have this airplane in it, that tells you it's not a turn and bank, it's a turn coordinator, and it shows you movement of both about the yaw and the roll axes. Let's take a look at what the FAA wants you to know about the pitot-static system instruments. And the first thing the FAA wants you to know about the pitot-static system instruments is what are they? Which ones are they? Well, they are the airspeed indicator, the vertical speed indicator, a lot of people call that the rate of climb indicator, and the altimeter. Now, all three of these instruments are connected to the static system vent, to the calm air outside the aircraft. We're showing these here on this drawing like so. Now, these static system vents are basically holes in the aircraft that are connected by plastic tubing to all three of these instruments. Now, these holes for the static system vents have to be outside the slipstream effect and outside the ram effect so that they get a good sample of the still, calm air outside the aircraft. So we take the air from the calm air outside the aircraft, and first of all, it runs by plastic tube to the altimeter. Now, the altimeter simply measures that air pressure. And the hands tell you the air pressure calibrated in thousands of feet above sea level. So basically all the altimeter really is an air pressure measuring device that gives you its answer in thousands of feet above sea level. Now the vertical speed indicator, or the rate of climb indicator, is really kind of interesting. It takes the air from this calm air, and as you go to higher and lower altitudes, the air pressure changes. Well, the vertical speed indicator is basically a box with a hole in it. And as you go to higher altitudes, the air wants to rush out of that hole through the static system vent. Well, the vertical speed indicator simply measures the speed at which the air rushes in and out of that hole and gives you your rate of climb and rate of descent. And finally, the airspeed indicator is also connected to this calm air from the static system vent. But in addition to being connected to the calm air from the static system vent, the airspeed indicator is connected to the ram air from the pitot tube. Now, the ram air from the pitot tube comes in and it had an increased pressure because the air rams in the front of the pitot tube. So you have to locate the pitot tube somewhere where the air will ram in the front of it. And you have this increased pressure from the pitot tube, and it's piped to the airspeed indicator. Now, the airspeed indicator basically measures the difference in the air pressure from the ram air from the pitot tube to the static tubes, and it compares the difference between the two, the static system vent. And that difference between the two is your airspeed indication. Now, as you might guess, the FAA will ask you a few questions about this on the FAA written exam. They're going to say, let's assume, super pilot, the pitot tube becomes clogged. Which of these three instruments would be affected? Well, there's only one of these instruments connected to the pitot tube, and that's the airspeed indicator. So the airspeed indicator would become inoperative if the pitot tube becomes clogged. And the reason for that, of course, is the airspeed indicator gets its information from the ram air from the pitot tube. Now, they're going to say, all right, this time let's assume the static system vents become clogged. Which of the instruments would be affected? Well, all three of these instruments are connected to the static system vent. So all three would be affected, and all you have to be able to do to answer this question is be able to name the three static system vent instruments. And they are the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, and the vertical speed indicator, and all three of those would become inoperative if the static system vents become clogged. And the final question they're going to ask you about this, same answer, they're going to say, let's assume both the pitot tube and the static system vents would become clogged. which instruments would be affected. And those same three instruments, the airspeed indicator, the altimeter, and the vertical speed indicator, would be affected. So now, with this information, you know everything the FAA is going to ask you on the FAA written exam about those three instruments. However, they will ask you a few questions about how to read an altimeter and what it tells you when you do read it. Well, we all know how to read altimeters. It's easy. We've been in airplanes. We can read altimeters, no problem whatsoever. However, on the FAA written exam, it's a different ball game. You see, in an airplane, you know whether you're at 500 feet, 5,000 feet, or 15,000 feet. But on a piece of paper, you don't have a clue. So it's tougher on the FAA written exam, and not only that, they ask you trickier questions. So let's see how they're going to ask you questions about reading an altimeter on the FAA written exam. Okay, to do that, let's take a look at altimeter 1. Now, the trick to reading these altimeters is what you do is recognize that there are three hands on the altimeters on the FAA written exam. Then what you do is read each hand individually and add up the total of each of the three hands. For instance, if you look at this altimeter here, there's one teeny tiny hand right here, and that's the tens of thousands hand. Now in this particular case, the tens of thousands hand is pointing between the 1 and the 2. And whenever a hand points between two numbers, you always call it the smallest number. For instance, if you look at your watch and it's 2:15, well, when you do that, the little hand on your watch would be between 2 and 3. But you wouldn't call it 3:15, you call it 2:15, because when you look at your watch and a hand falls between two numbers, you always call it the smaller number. Well, the same way on an altimeter. When the hand falls between two numbers, you always call it the smaller number. So how many tens of thousands do we have here? You got it right, it's 1/10,000. Now the next hand, the fat hand, tells you thousands. And it's in between two numbers, so how many thousands do we have? You got it, 0 thousands. And then this is the hundreds hand. The long hand, the one that's really easiest to read, is the hundreds hand, and that's 500s. And basically what each hand tells you is what percentage of the way between the two numbers the previous hand was. This hand is telling you that the thousands hand is halfway in between the 0 and the 1. It's 500s, and it tells you that right there. So we'll write down the 500s, and to figure out what this altimeter reads, all we have to do is total them up, and I get 10,500. Let's do altimeter number 2. In altimeter number 2, we read the smallest hand first, the tens of thousands hands. It's in between the 1 and 2. What are we going to call it? You got it, 1/10,000. And then we look at the thousands hands. That's the big fat hand. It's in between the 4 and 5. So how many thousands do we have? We got 4 thousands. And then the long skinny hand, the one that's really easiest to read, tells us how many hundreds. It's easy in this case, it's 500s. And so we get 14,500. Add them up and you get 14,500. Now let's take a look at altimeter number 3. Altimeter number 3, we got a problem. Is this pointing to the 1 or before the 1 or after the 1, this little teeny tiny tens of thousands hand? Well, to find the answer to that question, you can go look at the thousands hand. And if it's just after the 1 or at the 1, the thousands hand would be reading 0, but no, it's reading 9,000. It's 90% of the way around here, and that tells you that this hand is 90% of the way in between two numbers. Well, it's sure not 90% of the way between the 1 and 2, so it's 90% of the way between the 0 and the 1. So believe it or not, this hand, because this thousands hands told us that, this hand is not quite to the 1, so how many tens of thousands do we have here? And the answer is 0 tens of thousands. All right, now let's take a look at the thousands hand. We have it in between a 0 and a 9, so how many thousands is that? 9 thousands. And then look at the hundreds. It's easy, that's 500s. So all we have to do is add that up, total them up, and you get 9,500. So you and I now know how to read an altimeter on a piece of paper as well as in an airplane. There are several kinds of altitudes. First of all, if you look at your altimeter and you read your altimeter, you'll read indicated altitude. So indicated altitude is basically what your altimeter reads. You just read it right off your altimeter. But true altitude is really what it would read if it's reading correctly, and that tells you the vertical distance of the aircraft above sea level. So if your altimeter is reading correctly, it tells you true altitude, and that's how high you are above sea level. Now, indicated altitude and true altitude may not always be the same. So true altitude is how high you are above sea level. Now, absolute altitude is how high you are above the terrain that you're flying over at the time. Now the terrain goes up and down, and altimeters tell you how high you are above sea level, but not how high you are above the terrain unless you have a radar altimeter shooting a radar beam down. So your absolute altitude is something you normally don't know unless you calculate it. If you know the height of the terrain and you know your true altitude, you can figure out the absolute altitude by subtracting, but that's the only way you would know it. So absolute altitude is the vertical distance of the aircraft above the surface. That's the absolute altitude. Finally, let's take a look at pressure altitude. Pressure altitude is what you get when you put 29.92 in the little setting window of your altimeter. It's the indicated altitude when the barometric pressure scale, the setting scale, is set to 29.92, and it tells you how far you are above sea level at standard pressure. Now, normally in real life, you're never really at standard pressure, so this 29.92 pressure level moves up and down. It may or may not be at sea level. Almost always it won't exactly be at sea level. And so it tells you how far you are above the standard pressure level, which is 29.92, which may be different than your true altitude. Why do you care about pressure altitude? Well, because you'll normally use it in the performance charts when you're calculating the performance of the aircraft. You use it as a starting spot in the performance calculations of the aircraft, and that's pressure altitude. So those are the altitudes real quickly. First of all, indicated altitude is what your altimeter reads. True altitude is your vertical distance of the aircraft above sea level. Absolute altitude is the vertical distance of the aircraft above the surface, and pressure altitude is what you get when you put 29.92 in the setting window of the altimeter, and it tells you how far you are above the standard pressure level of 29.92. So that's what your altimeter tells you. Now let's take a look at the concept of altimeter setting, and that's what you put in the little setting window of the altimeter. When you have the correct altimeter setting in here, that value is what you would set in the barometric pressure scale of the altimeter, and it would indicate true altitude at field elevation. So if you look on a map here, you see that the elevation of this airport is 756 feet. If you put the proper setting in the setting window of your altimeter and you're sitting on the ground at this airport, your altimeter should read 756 feet, and that's what altimeter setting is all about. Now, another case when the indicated altitude is equal to true altitude is at sea level under standard conditions, and they're going to ask you a question about that on the test. They're going to say, when is indicated altitude equal to true altitude? Well, one of them, of those conditions, is when you're parked on the ground with the proper setting in the setting window of the altimeter, and that's pretty common. Another case, far less common, is when you're at sea level under standard conditions. Then your indicated altitude would be equal to true altitude too. Not very common, so therefore they ask you a test question about it. Well, here's another test question. They ask you about altimeters on the FAA written exam, and that is they have you going from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. And they say, all right, you do this, but you fail to reset the little setting window on your altimeter. What's going to happen? Well, let's take a look at it. First of all, when you're in an area of high pressure, instead of 29.92 at sea level, you might have 30.00 at sea level. And then you go up 1,000 feet from an area of high pressure, you might have 29 inches up 1,000 feet, and up another 1,000, about 28 inches. And that's really the way it works. For about each 1,000 feet of altitude you go up, the air pressure drops off about 1 inch of mercury. So let's assume that you are here in an area of high pressure, and that means you have 30.00 at sea level. And let's assume you take off and you climb to an indicated altitude of 1,000 feet. Well, at 1,000 feet, you'd actually be flying a pressure level of 29.00 because you got 30.00 set in a little setting window of the altimeter, and you're flying at an indicated altitude of 1,000 feet. You're really at the pressure level of 29.00. Now let's take a look and see what happens when you follow this pressure level, and that's what you're doing when you're flying an indicated altitude of 1,000 feet with 30.00 set in a setting window of your altimeter. You're following the 29.00 pressure level. So let's follow that pressure level and fly to an area of low pressure, and you can see what's going to happen. If you get to an area of low enough of pressure, eventually the 29.00 pressure level will be right down on the ground, and you're going to be in the trees. So here's what happens. If you fly from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure and fail to reset the setting window of the altimeter, your airplane will be too low. And there's an expression that pilots use for that, and the expression is, from high to low, look out below. And the reason you have to look out below is the airplane's too low. Now, pilots know this. Almost everybody knows this. So therefore, that's not the way the FAA asks you the question on the FAA written exam. The way they ask you the question in the test is you go from an area of high pressure to low pressure, what would your altimeter indicate? Well, with high to low, look out below means the airplane's too low. The reason the airplane's too low is because the altimeter is indicating too high. So if you go from high to low, the altimeter would indicate higher than actual altitude. Let's go the other way and do another one. This time, let's go from low pressure to high pressure. So here you start over here in the area of low pressure, and you fly up here to an area of high pressure. Well, the same saying works as backwards. Low to high, clear of the sky, means the airplane is too high. Why is the airplane too high? Because the altimeter is reading too low. So here's the way they ask it on the test. From low to high, what's your altimeter going to read? And your altimeter indicates too low. It indicates lower than actual altitude. Now, another thing you need to know is what happens when you adjust the setting window in the altimeter. Well, let you and I take a look and see what happens when you adjust the setting window in the altimeter. Notice in this particular case that we have 29.92 set in the setting window of the altimeter, and the hands are reading about 480 feet. Well, let's put a bigger number in the setting window of the altimeter. Now, notice when you do that, now we're getting up to 30-something or other, the hands are getting to be bigger numbers. So what you need to know is if you adjust the setting window on your altimeter to put a bigger number in this setting window of your altimeter, the hands will read bigger numbers. Now, another thing you need to know is how much a bigger number will the hands read? Well, the answer is you'll get 1,000 feet of altitude, indicated altitude change for each 1 inch of mercury. So if you change the setting window by 1 inch, you'll get a change in the hands by 1,000 feet. And if you put a bigger number in the setting window, the hands, that's 1 inch bigger, the hands will go up 1,000 feet. Now, as you might guess, they are going to ask you an FA test question about this, so let's take a look at the question they're going to ask you. They say, let's assume that it's necessary to set 29.85 in the altimeter after you had 29.15 in the altimeter. Okay, now what's going to happen? First of all, you put a bigger number in the setting window. That means the hands are going to read a bigger number. How much? Well, all you have to do is subtract, and this difference is 7/10 of an inch. Well, 1 inch is 1,000 feet, so 7/10 of an inch is going to be 7/10 of 1,000 feet. How much bigger will the hands read? You got it, 700 feet. Now, you got that figured out. There's another thing you know about the setting window of the altimeter that's interesting, and that is if you put 29.92 in the setting window of your altimeter, when you do that, your hands will read pressure altitude. So on the test, what do you need to know? You need to know if you want to find pressure altitude and you happen to be sitting in an airplane, simply put 29.92 in the setting window of your altimeter and your hands will indicate pressure altitude. Now, we talked about high to low, look out below, low to high, clear the sky, when we talked about going from low pressure to high pressure and high pressure to low pressure. Well, that same expression works by going from cold temperatures to warm temperatures and warm temperatures to cold temperatures. Let you and I take a look at it. Here is a warm temperature situation. It's hotter in the daylights out there. Well, what you need to know is that on warm days, the pressure levels, the whole atmosphere actually gets taller. The pressure levels are raised and the airplane's higher than the indicated altitude. That means the indicated altitude is lower than true altitude. Now, here's why. What happens is on days when the temperature is warmer than standard, the whole atmosphere actually gets taller. And on days when the temperature is colder than standard, the whole atmosphere actually gets lower. There's no lid on the atmosphere, so when the temperatures rise, the whole atmosphere actually gets taller like this. Now, what that means then is if you're flying at an indicated altitude of 10,000 feet, actually the true altitude of the airplane on warm days might be as high as, we'll say, 11 or 12,000 feet. The airplane is higher than the indicated altitude. And the expression works. Low to high, clear the sky means the airplane is going to be higher in warm temperatures. That works for low temperatures to high temperatures, means the airplane is going to be higher. We all understand that. It makes great sense to pilots, so therefore they're not going to ask us that way. Here's the way they're going to ask the question on the FA written exam. They say you fly to temperatures warmer than standard. What's the indicated altitude going to be compared to true altitude? And the answer is the indicated altitude will be lower than true altitude. Let's take a look at that one more time. The indicated altitude is still 10,000 feet, but the true altitude might be 11 or 12,000. The indicated is lower than the actual true altitude of the aircraft. Okay, once again, if you go to cold temperatures, high to low, look out below, fly into cold temperatures means the airplane's going to be too low. Let's take a look at the way they're going to ask you about this on the test. Here's the way it goes. They're going to say you fly in colder than standard temperatures. They're going to ask you, in this case, what is the true altitude of the aircraft? Well, the true altitude is lower than the indicated altitude. Well, another instrument we need to talk about is a very basic one. It's the magnetic compass. But the problem is the magnetic compass has errors in it, and the errors in a magnetic compass are caused by magnetic dip. Now, I want to point out right now that that is not a reference to my personality in any way. I have often been called a dip, but I have never been called a magnetic dip. All right, let's take a look at magnetic dip and see how it works here. First of all, the way magnetic dip works is the fact that there are lines of magnetic force surrounding the Earth. And these lines of magnetic force are parallel to the Earth around the equator, but as soon as you get away from the equator, they tend to dip down into the Earth at the poles. So what that means for you is in your airplane, your compass wants to align itself parallel to these lines of magnetic force. And anytime you're away from the equator, the compass not only wants to point north, but it also wants to dip down into the Earth like so. Well, normally your compass cannot dip down into the Earth because it's on an axis and it rotates around that axis. But when you're accelerating or decelerating, or when you're banking for a turn near headings of north and south, your compass is no longer accurate. So the question is, when is your compass accurate? Well, the magnetic compass is accurate only in straight and level and unaccelerated flight. So if you're in straight and level, unaccelerated flight, then your compass is accurate. Now, one of the things that's important to know about acceleration errors is when they occur. Well, acceleration errors occur only on easterly or westerly headings. Now, if you accelerate or decelerate on a heading of north or south, it has no effect on the compass. So acceleration errors occur only on easterly or westerly headings. Now, pilots often have trouble remembering how these work, so there's a word that I use that helps you remember that, and the word is ands, as in no ands, ors, ifs, or buts about it. It's ands, accelerate north, decelerate south. Now, what this word tells you is if you're on an easterly or westerly heading and you speed up or accelerate, the compass will momentarily show a turn towards a heading of north. And if you're on an easterly or westerly heading and you decelerate or slow down, the compass momentarily will show a turn towards a heading of south. Now let's take a look at an example. First of all, here's the type of question they're going to ask you. If the airplane is accelerated while on an easterly or westerly heading, what will the compass indicate? Well, if you accelerate on an easterly or westerly heading, ands tells you you're going to show a turn towards the heading of north. Now normally the compass can't dip down into the Earth. It wants to dip down into the Earth when you're away from the equator. Normally it can't dip down into the Earth because it's on an axis. But when you accelerate the compass, you change the axis the compass is on. So let's accelerate this compass, and you see you change the axis the compass is on, and now it tilts, and therefore the compass can rotate around the axis and dip down into the Earth, and that's what happens, and the compass now shows a turn towards a heading of north during that period of acceleration. Okay, now let's take a look at deceleration. Now you're on an easterly or westerly heading again, and here's an example they're going to give to you on the test about this. If you decelerate the aircraft on an easterly or westerly heading, the compass will indicate a turn towards a heading of south. Ands, decelerate south, decelerate south. Now let's take a look at why that happens one more time. Once again, you're tilting the axis the compass is on when you decelerate. You're slowing the airplane down, the compass swings ahead, and now the north sensing arrow can rotate around this new axis, dip down into the Earth, and during that period of deceleration, the compass shows a turn towards the heading of south. Now, what's the word we use to remember all of this? Well, it's the very next thing we want to talk about, and that word is ands. Accelerate north, decelerate south, as in no ands, ors, ifs, or buts about it. Okay, now let's take a look at the next thing we want to talk about, and that is compass turning errors. And compass turning errors occur only on north and south headings, and here's the way they work. If you're on a heading of north and you start a turn in one direction, the compass momentarily indicates a turn in the opposite direction. And the word we use to remember that is the word no, north opposite. If you're on a heading of north and you start a turn in one direction, the compass momentarily indicates a turn in the opposite direction. All right, now let's assume you and I are on a heading of north and we start a left-hand turn. Well, what's going to happen? The compass will indicate initially a turn towards the right, and that'll be to the east, and here is why. Let's see if we can take a look at why. If you're on a heading of north, what you do is you bank the airplane. when you start that left-hand turn. So let's go ahead and start a turn. Well, we'll do a turn to the right. We'll start a turn to the right. We bank the airplane, and what happens, because you've tilted the axis the compass is on, it can rotate around that axis, and the north sensing arrow dips down, and the compass momentarily shows a turn in the opposite direction. Let's do one more example. This time, let's assume you and I are in a heading of north, and we start a right turn. The compass will momentarily indicate a turn towards the left or to the west, just as exactly as we have shown right here. And those are called compass turning errors. Well, now let's talk about how you're going to remember this. Well, as you remember, these compass turning errors occur in turns near headings of north and south. You already know about no north opposite. So if you start a turn on a heading of north, the compass will momentarily indicate a turn in the opposite direction. But here's something else the compass does. In turns near headings of north, the compass kind of lags behind the nose of the aircraft. It undershoots the nose of the aircraft, so it undershoots in turns near headings of north. But on the other hand, if you're in a turn near a heading of south, the compass overshoots or goes too fast. And the word I use to remember that is the word we're all very familiar with, cosin. I'm sorry, I've had absolutely no idea what in Sam Hill the word cosin means. It's a word I made up to help remember the compass overshoots in turns near headings of south and undershoots in turns near headings of north. Now let's take a look at how it works on a turn near a heading of south. You're on a heading of south, you start a turn to the right. What's going to happen is the compass will jump ahead faster than your rate of turn. So if you're on a heading of south and you start a turn to the right, the compass will indicate a turn to the right, but at a much faster rate. So if you start what they call a standard rate turn, about 3 degrees a second, and you start that turn, what you'll see is your magnetic compass will show a turn to the right, but much faster than that 3 degrees a second you're trying to do. So let's go back and review this one more time. First of all, NO is north opposite, and remember the compass overshoots in turns near headings of south and undershoots in turns near headings of north, and the word you're going to use to remember that is a word we're all very familiar with, cosin. All right, one last group of errors in your compass we need to talk about, and that's called magnetic deviation errors. And magnetic deviation errors are caused by magnetic fields inside the aircraft from radios and engine all put out magnetic fields, and that throws your compass off. You correct for deviation errors with this compass correction card like so. So you just look and it says you're on a heading of north. For a compass heading of north, you actually steer 004, so there's about a 4-degree error in that area. Well, believe it or not, you and I have now covered everything the FAA asks you on the private pilot written exam about aircraft instruments, and maybe these make a little more sense now. Let's see if you and I can figure out what the FAA wants you as a private pilot to know about sectional charts. And I guess one of the things they want you to know is who you are, where you are, and what time it is. And what time it is not all that simple from an aviation standpoint, because you use an airplane to go from time zone to another time zone. And what that means is someone asks you, what time will you arrive? You have to know what time zone they're referring to. So to make everything perfectly clear, you file all flight plans and get the weather in the time that it is in Greenwich, England. That is called Coordinated Universal Time, and that's abbreviated UTC. Notice that's a transposition of the letters because it would be CUT, but since it's international, it's abbreviated as UTC. Now, if you give someone the time and Coordinated Universal Time, it'd be a little bit complicated to have to say Coordinated Universal Time every time you talked about it. So you use the word Zulu time. You say, I'll be there at 1100 Zulu, and that tells them you're referring to Coordinated Universal Time. So you always refer to Zulu, and that tells what time zone you're talking about, Coordinated Universal Time. Also, in aviation, you use the 24-hour clock. It starts out, of course, at 0100. That's 1 o'clock in the morning, or 1 o'clock. And then 11 in the morning would be 1100. So what time would 11 at night be? You've got it, 2300. You get to noon and just keep on counting up. Now, let's take a look at figure 28. And on the lower left-hand corner, there is a conversion table here on figure 28 that the FAA makes available to you to help you solve some problems they're going to ask you about it. Let's take a look at the conversion table. First of all, it says to convert from local time to Coordinated Universal Time, you add a certain number of hours. Let's take a look at it. To convert from Pacific Standard Time to Coordinated Universal Time, in this case, you'd add, and it says right there, add 8 hours. All right, now here's the way they're going to ask you a question about it. They're going to say an aircraft departs at 10:30 Pacific Standard Time for a 4-hour flight to an airport in the Central Standard Time Zone. Now the question is going to be, is what time will the landing be in Coordinated Universal Time? Well, you got to remember to take a very careful look at what they ask on the question. They ask about Coordinated Universal Time. Now, the way I always solve these problems, first of all, I convert everything to Coordinated Universal Time. And I do that by adding the conversion they give you. Now, if you need to convert back to a local time, and we'll do that later on, you can always subtract instead of adding to convert back to a local time. But in this case, they ask you about Coordinated Universal Time. So here's the way the problem will work. You depart at 10:30 Pacific Standard Time. They tell you that. You're going to make the conversion. On Pacific Standard Time, the conversion's 8 hours. So you add 8 hours, and you find that in Coordinated Universal Time, you're departing 18:30. That's 18:30 Zulu time, by the way, is the way people say that. You're going to fly for 4 hours, so your arrival time in Zulu time is 22:30. All you have to do is add these things up. So that's all there is to it. Let's take a look at another one. Using figure 28 one more time, they're going to tell you this time, all right, an aircraft departs at 9:30 Central Standard Time. And first of all, we want to convert everything to Greenwich Mean Time. And by the way, you're going to do a 2-hour flight. And the question is going to be, what time will you arrive in the Mountain Standard Time Zone? And what time will it be in local time when you arrive? Now, first of all, convert everything to Coordinated Universal Time. And to do that, you add the conversion. We're in Central Standard Time, so Central Standard Time, you can look on the table down here. Central Standard Time, the conversion is 6 hours. So you add the 6 hours for that conversion, and that means you're going to be departing in Zulu time at 15:30 Zulu time. And your flight is going to take 2 hours, so in Zulu time, you're going to arrive at 17:30. Now, if to get from local time to Zulu time you add, what would you have to do to get from Zulu time back to local time? And the answer is you subtract. In this case, we're in the Mountain Standard Time Zone. Mountain Standard Time, the conversion is 7 hours. We'll subtract that 7 hours. And our arrival time in the Mountain Standard Time is 10:30 local time. And that is all there is to that. That's a lot easier. Let's talk about where we are. As you know, one method of communicating our position on the surface of the Earth is to use latitude and longitude. And when you use latitude and longitude, you refer first of all to the equator for latitude. You have the equator going around the Earth at the midpoint, halfway in between the poles, and it's, of course, perpendicular to the poles, like so. And so here's your latitude here. And there are 90 degrees going north. Now, we're in the northern hemisphere, so that's all we're going to talk about. There are also 90 degrees going south. But latitude is how far you are in degrees north or south of the equator. And then you can break each degree. There are 90 degrees going north. Each degree is broken down into 60 minutes. And by the way, 60 minutes are broken down into 60 seconds, further broken down further than that. Now, each minute of latitude is 1 nautical mile. And it works out that way just exactly. And that's where the term nautical mile comes from. Each minute of latitude is a nautical mile. We'll talk more about that later on. Now, longitude uses the prime meridian. It uses the line that goes from the pole to the pole and passes through Greenwich, England, as the measuring point. So we use the prime meridian. And there are 180 degrees going west and 180 degrees going east. Now, we are in the western hemisphere, so we're going to be west of the prime meridian. So we'll be in north latitude and west of the prime meridian. So longitude tells you how many degrees you are east or west of the prime meridian, and longitude is broken down into minutes and seconds, just like latitude is. You know, these days with GPS, being able to speak the language of latitude and longitude is more important than it used to be. If you're flying in someplace here, this is Baja, California. If you're flying someplace in like Baja, California, sometimes latitude and longitude is the very best way to express where you are. So the FAA wants you to know the language of latitude and longitude. So let's review this a little bit. You remember the equator goes around the Earth like so, and the lines of latitude are parallel to the equator. The lines of
longitude go all the way around the Earth at the pole, and as a rule, the lines of longitude are longer than the lines of latitude because the lines of latitude get smaller and smaller as they get closer to the pole, but the lines of longitude are all the same length. They go completely around from pole to pole all the way around the Earth. Now, the FAA will also ask you whether lines of longitude are parallel to the equator or cross the equator at right angles. Well, the lines of longitude cross the equator at right angles. Now, let's talk about also how you're going to determine your location. We in the United States are north of the equator, so we're in the northern hemisphere, and we in the United States, here's the prime meridian, are west of the prime meridian, so we're at west longitude. And whenever you solve problems involving latitude and longitude, you always talk about north and south first. You'd say we are north 30 and we are west so-and-so. So you always talk about north first, and that will help you speak the language of latitude and longitude.
Now let's take a look at the way the FAA is going to ask us questions about this on the test. And to do that, let's you and I take a look at Figure 27, Area 2. And let's take a look at Cooperstown Airport, because the question on the test they're going to ask us is, where is Cooperstown Airport? In other words, what is the latitude and longitude of Cooperstown Airport? Where in the world is that airport? I've often wondered that when I'm flying. Well, let's take a look at Cooperstown Airport and figure out where in the world this airport is. And I want to show you a trick that I think will make it absolutely flat out easy. And here's the trick. Take your pencil and draw a line through Cooperstown Airport parallel to a line of latitude, going right through the airport, considerably across the chart here, for a big distance across the chart like so. And do the same thing for a vertical line. Draw a vertical line through Cooperstown Airport parallel to a line of longitude like so. Now that you have those two lines drawn, we're going to make it easy to figure out lines of latitude and longitude and where that airport is located. And to do that, let's first of all find a line of latitude near that airport. We find a line of latitude here, but son of a gun, there is no number on it. So let's go down to the next line of latitude and find a number, and here's 47 degrees. So that line is 47 degrees, and all we have to do is count up from that line. We know that Cooperstown Airport is north of 47 degrees, and so we'll count north. Here's 47 degrees. Each little tick mark here is 1/60th of a degree, or 1 minute. That's 1 minute of latitude. Here's 47 degrees, 1, 2, and so on. And this line is 10 minutes. The major tick mark there is 10 minutes. So here's 47 degrees in 10 minutes. We keep on counting up. 47 degrees in 20 minutes. Count up again. And we have 47 degrees and 21, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we get 47 degrees and 25 minutes north. So we've already figured out the latitude of Cooperstown Airport. Let's figure out the longitude. To do that, we'll go to a line of longitude, find a number on it somewhere, and we're still looking for a number for line of longitude. I don't see any number there. There we have 98 degrees. So we can go back to a line of latitude from 98 degrees and start counting over. And by the way, you read longitude off lines of latitude and vice versa. This is a little bit confusing. But here we have 98 degrees. Each tick mark is 1 minute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I get 6 minutes west. So Cooperstown is 98 degrees and 6 minutes west. So we figured out earlier it's 47 degrees and 25 minutes north and 98 degrees and 6 minutes west. And if you use that technique, it'll be easy for you every time. Now let's do another one, and to do that we'll head over here to Figure 23, and the FAA is going to ask you, where in the world is Shoshone County Airport? A lot of pilots have probably wondered that from time to time too, so let's take a look at it. What they're really asking you, by the way, is what is the latitude and longitude of Shoshone County Airport? And we're going to use the same technique. We're going to draw a vertical line through the airport parallel to a line of longitude. We're going to draw a horizontal line through the airport parallel to a line of latitude, and we're going to use those lines to figure our latitude and longitude. All right, let's figure out our latitude first. That's how far north we are of the equator. We have a line, but we can't find any number on this line, so let's go up to the next major line for latitude and see what it is, and it's 48 degrees. So this line down here, by the way, we have a line each 30 minutes, so this line had to be 47:30. We could count tick marks up here, but that's tough to do because there's a lot of stuff in there. So let's go over to the left and count tick marks there and see if we can do that. Here, 47:30, 47:31, 32, 33. So the latitude of this airport is 47:33 north. Now let's
figure out the longitude. And we have our vertical line. Here we have another line over here of longitude, but once again, no number. So let's read up until we can find the number. And we find that that's 116 degrees. So let's go back and take a look at that and read our longitude off a line of latitude. Once again, it seems confusing, but here's 116 degrees. There's a major tick mark every 10 degrees, so that's 116.10. The next one is 11, so we're 116 degrees 11 west. So the latitude is 47.33 north, and the longitude is 116 and 11 west. Well, now let's do another one. This time, the FAA wants to ask you another question. Will they do it the same way? Nope. They're going to ask it backwards. Let's take a look at it on figure 22. And do the FAA trick of turning that question around backwards. Now, here's the way they're going to ask you a question. They're going to say, all right, super pilot, what airport is located at 47 degrees, 39 minutes, and they're going to get tricky here, 30 seconds north. Now, each minute is further broken down into 60 seconds, so that's half a minute. That's 30/60ths of a second, that's half a minute. So we're really talking about 47 degrees and 39 and a half minutes north, and we're also going to look for 100 degrees and 53 minutes and 00 seconds, so they could have just left that seconds off. I think they put that in there to confuse you. So 100 degrees and 53 minutes west. So let's look for 47 degrees and 39 and a half minutes north to begin with and see if we can find an airport there. First of all, this is 48 degrees. And let's go down to 47.30. It would be the next major line of latitude down here. They don't label it, but we know it's 47.30 because that was 48. And all we have to do is count up north. So 47.30 here. And then here's 47.40 because that's a tick mark. We count down a half minute. And there's 47.39.30, and all we have to do is draw a horizontal line across the chart right here and see, by the way, we have a candidate airport already. It went right through the middle of that airport right there, which was Crooked Lake. So we might have our airport already. So we've drawn a horizontal line there at 47.39.30 north across there. Now let's look for 100 degrees and 53 minutes west. And to do that, we'll find somewhere on a line of longitude. Here's 101 degrees. Now, as you go further to the west, the numbers get bigger. Further to the east, the numbers get smaller. So here's, this is basically 100 degrees and 60 minutes. Here's 59, 58, 57, 56, 55, 54, 53. That's 100 degrees and 53 minutes west. We counted 7 minutes back to the east. And we'll draw a vertical line there and see what we get. And son of a gun, we get Crooked Lake. Our candidate airport worked out to be right, and Crooked Lake is located at 47 degrees and 39 minutes and 30 seconds north, and 100 degrees and 53 minutes west, and we found the airport. And by the way, we're about to pass our sanity test, because the first question on the sanity test is, when is it? Well, we figured that out with the coordinated universal time. Second question is, where are you? We know that now. We're at Crooked Lake, and presumably we knew who we were to begin with. Now let's take a look at how airports are shown on a sectional chart, and to do that, let's take a look at figure 22. Let's start off by taking a look at Garrison Dam here, and you notice there's a little red circle, and that little red circle is a basic symbol for an airport. That tells you they have an airport right there, and that's Garrison Dam. Now let's go over to Evanston Airport, and you notice that you have the little red circle for an airport, but there's an R inside that little red circle. That R tells you it's a private airport or a restricted airport. That simply means that somebody owns that airport. You're going to have to get permission before you land there, and that's that little R inside the airport symbol. Now let's take a look at Garrison Airport, and when you see Garrison Airport, they've got a little red circle, but they've added another symbol, and that's a symbol for a hard surface runway at least 1,500 feet in length. They'll show you roughly how long that runway is and what direction it points, so you have almost a picture of the runway there, and that's a hard surface runway at least 1,500 feet in length. Now let's take a look at the lower left-hand corner of the page and see if you and I can't find Mercer County Regional Airport. And here it is, and you can see that Mercer County Regional Airport also has a hard surface runway, at least 1,500 feet in length. But we have a new wrinkle here. There are tick marks on the top, bottom, and sides of the airport symbol. What do those little tick marks tell you? They tell you the airport is supposed to have fuel.
The reason I say supposed to have fuel is the FBO could always be out of fuel. They might be closed for the day or something of that sort, but they're supposed to have fuel service, and that's what those tick marks are all about. We looked at Garrison Airport earlier. Garrison Airport, you know, didn't have those tick marks, so you couldn't count on getting fuel there. Now let's take a look at Minot Airport. Up here at the top of the page up here is Minot Airport, and they do have those tick marks on the top and bottom and sides of the airport symbol. These little tick marks tells you the airport has fuel. Now, wait a minute. We have a new wrinkle here. The airport symbol is blue, not red. What does that mean? Well, the blue tells you they have a control tower, and the CT and a frequency up here tells you the frequency of the control tower. In this case, it's 118.2. That little star tells you the operation of the control tower is not continuous. It's not a 24-hour control tower. One other thing we need to take a look at, I said there's a tick mark on the top of the symbol. In this case, we don't. We see don't have it. We see a star instead. What does that star mean? Well, that star means when they have it, that they have a rotating beacon. And a rotating beacon is a light that sits on top of a tall tower that rotates around. One time you'll see a white light, another time you'll see a green light. If you see an alternating white and green light like that, that tells you that's a civilian field. If, on the other hand, you see a rotating beacon and instead of alternating white and green, you see two whites and green, white, white, green, white, white, green, the FAA calls that dual peaked white flashes or two quick flashes. Anytime you see those two quick flashes of white like that alternating with green, that tells you it's a military airport, or what the FAA calls a military error station. And what that means to you as a pilot is if you land in an airport that has this kind of rotating beacon, you're going to have a very time-consuming and stressful situation shortly after landing because you just landed at a military airport, probably without permission. Now let's assume today that you are a helicopter pilot. You're flying along in your helicopter. It's getting a little bit dark and you would like to land. Well, you could land at any airport, but also as a helicopter pilot, you could land at a heliport. So you look for a rotating beacon for a heliport, and this is what you're going to see. You'll see white and green with yellow in between, so it's white, green, and yellow, and you know that's a heliport. Now, if you happen to be in an airplane, do not attempt to land when you see this rotating beacon. Now, we said earlier when an airport has a control tower, you can tell by the airport symbol being blue and CT and a frequency. Let's confirm that. Let's take a look at figure 26, area 2, and let's take a look at Addison Airport. And the question is, what is the frequency for the control tower at Addison? Well, that's going to be pretty easy. They have the airport symbol that's blue. We know they have a control tower. It says CT, and then it tells you the frequency. So the frequency for Addison County Airport is 126.0. Now let's take a look at figure 21, and when you get to figure 21, we'll take a look at area 2 and Chesapeake Municipal Airport. And they're going to ask you a question about Chesapeake Municipal Airport, and that question will be, what is the elevation of this airport? Well, the elevation is shown just right after the airport identifier, just before lights, and here it is. The elevation of this airport is 20 feet. Now let me ask you a question. Is this airport located on the ground or above the ground? You got it right. It's located on the ground. So it can't be 20 feet above ground level or AGL. It's got to be 20 feet above sea level, and the term for that is MSL. Whenever they ask you the elevation of something, they're asking you how high it is above sea level, and this airport is 20 feet MSL. Now, the sectional chart gives you a lot of useful information, and sometimes it can give you life-saving information, because if you're doing any low flying at all, you'd like to know about things like this. These are TV antennas called obstructions, obstacles, and called day runners if you're not careful. Well, you'd like to know about these in advance if you're flying low, and you can do that by looking on your sectional chart. So let's take a look at figure 25, area 1. And when you get to figure 25, area 1, let's find an airport called Air Park East in the lower left-hand corner. If you look just a little bit down and to the right, you see an upside-down V with a dot. And that is a symbol for an obstruction, or the FAA calls it an obstacle. It's something you don't want to hit. It's a tall antenna, tall building, maybe a grain elevator, something of that sort. And you'll see a couple numbers over here on the right-hand side. The big number that is bold tells you the MSL elevation of that obstruction. It tells you how high the top of the obstruction is above sea level, and they call that the elevation of the obstruction. So if they ask you on a test, what is the elevation of this obstruction, you read the bold number, and that tells you how high the top of the obstruction is above sea level. If, on the other hand, they ask you the height of the obstruction, you would look at the little number in parentheses, and that tells you the height of the top of the obstruction above ground level. Now, here's what these numbers tell you. Let's assume you're flying along, and you happen to hit the top of the obstruction. Well, the bold number tells you what your altimeter will read when you hit that obstruction, and the little number in parentheses tells you how far you'll fall to the ground. Okay, so this is the elevation, and this is the height of the obstruction. You've got to be careful which one they asked you about. Now let's take a look at Air Park East Airport. And as tricky and as sneaky as they could possibly be, they ask you a question about this obstruction right here, nearly hidden by the airport symbol. And they ask you, in this particular case, is how high would you have to fly over the top of this obstruction by 500 feet? Well, we know that they give you this number, the bold number. By the way, they notice they didn't give you the AGL height of the obstruction. They just gave you the MSL elevation of the obstruction. We know that that number tells us what the altimeter is going to read when we hit that obstruction right at the top. We don't want to hit that obstruction. We want to be 500 feet higher. So you take this number and add 500 feet, and to fly 500 feet over the top of this obstruction, you'd have to fly at 1,273 feet MSL, and I can't believe it. That's a real good, real-life question. They actually asked you one of those on the test. Now let's mosey on over to figure 24, and we'll take a look at some other things that you really need to know about obstructions. First of all, sometimes you see two obstructions that look like they're welded together, and that's referred to as a group obstruction. When the obstructions on the ground are so close together that they're really just a unit, they will be shown as a group obstruction. Now here is an Eiffel Tower type symbol, or at least that's what I like to call it, and that is used when the obstruction is at least 1,000 feet above ground level. So whenever you see an Eiffel Tower type symbol, that tells you that that sucker is tall, at least 1,000 feet above ground level. Now let's move over to the right of the airport. When we get over there, what you're going to find is a group obstruction with a starburst symbol at the top of it, and that starburst symbol tells you this obstruction has high intensity lights. Now let me show you a question that they're going to ask you on the FAA knowledge exam that I think is very difficult. What makes it difficult is finding the right obstruction. They're going to say, first of all, this obstruction is on the 340 radial 11 miles from the Savannah Vortex. Well, then you need to find the Savannah Vortex. So here's the compass rose for the Savannah Vortex. Right in the center of it, very hard to see because it's underneath an airspace circle, is the Savannah Vortex. So you want to go out the 340 radial and 11 miles. So we'll find 11 miles and get it right beside that vortex, and then go up the 340 radial, and son of a gun, there is a group obstruction, and they're asking you about that group obstruction. Well, the question about that group obstruction is, how high is that obstruction? Well, all we have is this number right here, 455. Now let me ask you a question. Is that the height or the elevation? And the answer is that's the elevation, because this number is 455 MSL, and that's the elevation of the obstruction. Now the trick to this question is finding the proper obstruction, because there are obstructions all over the place, so make sure that you use your plotter to find the proper obstruction. This is so much fun. Let's take a look at Figure 21, Area 2. And you get to Figure 21, Area 2. Let's take a look at Lake Drummond. And they're going to say, take a look at Lake Drummond. What is that flag symbol at Lake Drummond? Let me ask you a question. True or false? That is a golf course. No, that's not a golf course. You can't put a golf course in a lake. That is what they call a visual checkpoint. It's a visual reporting point, and it's not mandatory or compulsory. It's voluntary to use, but up here to the right, you see that there's Norfolk, and you call Norfolk approach control. Well, they want you to know that here at Lake Drummond, that flag is a visual checkpoint that you would use to identify your position for an issue called a Norfolk approach control here. And the reason that they have
have that there, they put that flag there, and because that they have that visual checkpoint flag, it means it's fair game for you to call up the controller and say, Norfolk approach, this is Cherokee 7599 Romeo, Lake Drummond. And because they have that flag, this controller is supposed to know where Lake Drummond is. On the other hand, because they have that flag at Lake Drummond, it means it's fair game for the controller to call you up and say, Cherokee 7599 Romeo, report Lake Drummond. And because there's a red flag there at Lake Drummond, you're supposed to know where Lake Drummond is. But it's not compulsory to make that report. It just helps everybody out. It's voluntary. Now let's take a look at Area 5 on Figure 21, and I want to show you something that I think will get your attention. Because when you look right here, you notice a box where it says Caution, Unmarked Balloon on Cable to 3,000 feet MSL. These are called heliostats, and let's take a look at what we're talking about. Here, we're flying an airplane at 35,000 feet, but at 18,000 feet, there's a balloon. Now, the balloon isn't the hazard so much because you can see it, but going all the way to the ground, in this case, 18,000 feet, there is a cable, and you can't see that. So the FAA marks these on the chart because they thought you'd want to know. Now, the hazard is this balloon and the cable underneath it. By the way, it's not the blimp hangers. That's not what they're referring to. They're referring to this balloon and particularly the cable going all the way down to the ground. So, the FAA marks these things because you can't see the cable, and the FAA is equivalently saying to you, look out, boys, there's the cable there. Now let's take a look, if you will, at another question the FAA is going to ask you about, and that is on Figure 22. So let's take a look at Figure 22, and when we get there, let's you and I go down the lower right-hand corner of Figure 22, and down here in the lower right-hand corner, there's a note that tells you that the contour interval is 500 feet. And then they're going to ask you to go up and take a look at the light tan area between Minot, which is up here, and Audubon Lake, which is down here, and this whole light tan area is up in here. They're going to say, take a look at that light tan area, and what is the elevation of that light tan area? They're asking you, what do these contour lines tell you? Well, here's the contour line like so, and we know that they come at 500-foot intervals. And on the green side of the contour line, we can look at this airport at Garrison, and the elevation of that airport is 1932, and we can look up here and we see another airport up here, good old Polshuk, for instance, is 2245 in the tan area. So that contour line, as you can see, is the 2,000-foot contour line. It says so right there. The green area is less than 2,000 feet. The tan area is above 2,000 feet. Since the contour intervals are 500 feet, this tan area is between 2,000 feet and 2,500 feet MSL. And believe it or not, you and I have figured out everything the FAA is going to ask you about sectional charts on the test. So it's time to fold that chart up, put it away, and let you and I go flying. Well, hello, fellow pilots. I'm John King.
And I'm Martha King.
Welcome to the King Private Pilot Interactive DVD course. Now, this is a complete course that will prepare you for the Private Pilot Knowledge Test using your TV right in the comfort of your own home.
Before you get started, we'd like to take a couple of moments to show you how to get the best from this course, so you'll be ready to ace your test. And that's important because the material covered by the FAA Knowledge Test is so vital that the FAA specifies in the regulations that it be covered.
We'll make sure you do well and remember what you learned because we understand it's our job to clarify, simplify, and make it fun.
We'll help you see patterns and relationships and make associations. We'll give you vivid, evocative examples and memory aids that help you remember key points for a lifetime. And we'll be sure to make it all fun.
So let's join Martha as she takes you on a short tour of your King Private Pilot Interactive DVD course.
When you start your interactive DVD course, you'll get the main menu screen. The main menu screen is where you'll see the picture icons for each of the King subject areas. We recommend you follow this path to complete your Private Pilot interactive DVD course. Now, after you've watched this Start Here segment, the orange box will be highlighting the first subject icon on your path, aerodynamics. When you press Enter on your remote control, you'll see a menu which lists the lesson groups in that subject area. By the way, on some DVD players, it may take a little while for this lesson group menu to appear. The orange box will usually be highlighting the lesson group you should study next. If it's not, just use your remote to move it to the correct lesson group. Pressing Enter brings up a lesson menu showing the individual video lessons in this lesson group. One way you'll know that you're in the video lesson menu is that you'll see this TV icon at the top of the menu. If you want to take this lesson now, just go ahead and press Enter. Your video lesson will start automatically.
The FAA wants you as a private pilot to have some idea of when an airplane is going to fly and when the airplane is going to stall it, what makes it fly and what makes it stall.
While you're playing the video, your remote gives you complete control to pause or move forward or backward in the video. If you press the menu button on your remote, it takes you completely out of the video and back to the lesson menu. But if you watch the video to the end, the system will return you to the lesson menu, and the orange box will highlight the next video lesson you should take. Now, sometimes a menu has more than one page. You'll see that by a note at the bottom that says, in this instance, page 1 of 2. When you've finished the lessons on page 1, the right-facing airplane will be highlighted. To go to the next page, just press Enter. By the way, pressing Enter when the right-facing airplane is highlighted will always take you forward to the next page, and pressing Enter when the left-facing airplane is highlighted will take you back to the previous page. When you finish all the video lessons in a lesson group, the orange box will highlight the hanger at the bottom, which is the menu icon. Anytime you select the menu icon and press Enter, the system will take you back up one level, which in this case will be to the lesson group menu. And notice that when you get back to the lesson group menu, the orange box is highlighting the next lesson group you should study. When you've finished all the lesson groups in a subject, the orange box will move to highlight Review Questions. If you select this, you'll be given some representative questions related to what you just learned. When you get to a question, answer A will always be highlighted. To answer the question, simply move the orange box to highlight your choice of the 3 possible responses and then press Enter. You'll get immediate feedback on how you did. If you get the question correct, as you did here, the orange box will highlight the right-facing airplane at the bottom of the screen. Pressing Enter will take you to the next question. If you get the question wrong, the orange box will highlight the open book instead. Pressing Enter with the highlight on the open book brings up an explanation for the answer to that question, and the orange box moves to highlight the TV. Choosing the TV replays the video lesson. Of course, you can also choose to see the explanation or replay the video lesson, even if you got the question correct. You can exit the video lesson at any time and return to the question by pressing Menu on your remote control. To move to the next question, select the right-facing airplane. Selecting the left-facing airplane takes you back to the previous question. When you have the last review question, the main menu icon will appear. If you got the question wrong, the orange box will still highlight the open book for the explanation. But if you answered the question correctly, as you did here, the orange box will now highlight the main menu icon. If you press Enter, the system will take you back to the main menu, and the orange box will now highlight the next subject for you to study. You can also get to the main menu at any time by pressing the title or top menu button on your remote control. By the way, different remotes have different features, and they even label their buttons differently. So you might want to check your manual to make sure you're getting the most from your DVD player. As long as you keep your DVD player turned on with the disc in it, the system will suggest the next subject or next lesson you should take. But since the DVD system does not have a memory like your computer does, if you turn it off, open the tray, or play something else on it, then the next time you resume your study, you'll have to move the highlight box to the next lesson that you should take. So it would be a good idea anytime you decide to stop studying for a while to make a note of what subject and lesson you're on. By the way, if you select a subject that's not on the disc currently in your DVD player, a message will come up that prompts you to insert the correct disc. The last picture icon is labeled How to Ace Your Test. This is where we give you hints and tips for getting the best score on your FAA knowledge test. Now let's briefly look at some important items you get in your King course book. First of all, you do not need to take notes during the video segments because we've already taken care of that for you, and you'll find those course notes in the front of your book. Take a look at the table of contents page. This lists everything you've got in your King course book, and notice that it starts off with course notes and lists all of the subjects that we'll be covering. Take a look now at the first page of the course notes and notice that at the end of the paragraph you see a number in parentheses. That's the number of the exact FAA question that that particular course note refers to. If you read the course note and say, okay, I understand that, but exactly how does the FAA ask me the question about it? You can take a look at these question numbers, and then you can go into the FAA questions and look up and see exactly how the questions are worded. So after the course notes, you'll find the entire FAA question bank. The questions are grouped by topic, and the first group of questions covers aerodynamics. The questions are in the left-hand column, and our answers and explanations are in the right-hand column. You get representative questions on each topic in your DVD course, but if you want to see all the possible questions the FAA might ask you, this is the place to look. Now, behind the FAA questions, you'll find Appendix 1, which has some very useful legends in it. The legend for sectional charts and the legend for reading the airport facility directory. You'll have a supplemental book when you take the FAA knowledge test that has those legends in it. The supplemental book will also have the figures you need for the questions, and in your King course book you'll find those figures in Appendix 2. Now, in the very back of your King course book, starting on page A1, you'll find a quick reference for the answers. It lists the question number, and then it lists our answer. This area also tells you which questions are helicopter or gyroplane or glider questions. Also, in the back of your King course book, you'll find 3 private pilot airplane sample FAA tests. Those are your graduation exams, and you'll take them at the end of the course. Now, currently there are 60 questions on the FAA Private Pilot Knowledge Test, and that's the same number that we've put on these sample tests. The FAA has a habit of changing how many questions they ask on the test, but they still use the same question pool. So don't worry if you get more or less than 60 questions on your FAA test. They'll still be taken from the same question pool that you're working with here. Now, the best way to take your sample tests and review the FAA questions is to use the King Computerized Exam Review. The Computerized Exam Review prepares you to take the exam on computer, which is the only way you can take it. There's no paper and pencil testing. You can use the King Computerized Exam Review to make it fun to ensure a Top Gun score. You can choose questions by subject or take them all. Then you receive on screen the correct answer with King's detailed explanation. Your computer will track your progress, allowing you to select unanswered questions or previously missed questions, and your report card will highlight the areas you need to concentrate on to improve your score. The practice exams let you display your test in the same way that you'll see it at an FAA computerized testing center. And because you'll already be familiar with the computerized testing format, you know you'll do your best. By the way, if you're interested in the Computerized Exam Review and you have a DVD drive on your computer, you might want to consider upgrading to King's DVD for Computer course by just paying the difference in price. You'll have the same great video quality as on this DVD for TV course. Plus, you'll get a course with true interactivity, because it fully integrates the entire FAA question bank with your video lessons and tracks your progress at all times. And if you choose, you can still play the same DVDs on your set-top player with your TV. Now, also in the back of your King course book, you'll find the instructor's endorsement for taking the FAA knowledge test. Either you can ask your own CFI to sign it, or we'll be glad to do it, whatever's easiest and most convenient for you. If you'd like for us to sign you off for the knowledge test, just send us copies of your 3 sample exams, and we'll get your endorsement right back to you. You also have there in the back of your course book some test-taking hints to help you do the very best on the exam. The most important thing you need to remember to take with you to the test is photo identification. That means identification with both your signature and your picture on it. Now, when you get your test results back, we would very much appreciate it if you'd send back to us that results postcard in the back of your King course book. It's the only way we've got of knowing how good a job we've done for you. So when you get your score, send us that postcard back and give us your comments. Give us our score so we can make this the very best course for you that we possibly can. And as soon as we get your postcard, we'll send you your own personalized graduation certificate. And now you're ready to get the very best from your King Private Pilot Interactive DVD course.
Well, hello, fellow pilots. I'm John King.
And I'm Martha King.
Welcome to the King Private Pilot DVD course with true interactivity. And this is a complete course that will prepare you for the Private Pilot Knowledge Test using your computer.
Before you get started, we'd like to take a couple of moments to show you how to get the best from this course, so you'll be ready to ace your test. And that's important, because the material covered by the FAA knowledge test is so vital that the FAA specifies in the regulations that it be covered.
And we'll make sure you do well and remember what you learn, because we understand it's our job to clarify, simplify, and make it fun.
We'll help you see patterns and relationships and make associations. We'll give you vivid, evocative examples and memory aids that help you remember key points for a lifetime. And we'll be sure to make it all fun.
So let's join Martha as she takes you on a short tour of your King Private Pilot Interactive DVD course.
First of all, to make sure the program runs smoothly, check the Display Property Settings tab to be sure your colors are set to high color, 16-bit, and 800 by 600 screen resolution. If you choose 1024 by 768, the video will fill your screen, but the other graphics won't. When you start your interactive DVD course, you'll get the main menu screen. The main menu screen is where you'll see the picture icons for each of the King subject areas and also the question review icon. We recommend you follow this path to complete your Private Pilot Interactive DVD course, and then use the question review to prep for your FAA knowledge test. So to get started, move your pointer over the first subject on your path, aerodynamics. When you click your mouse, you'll see the pop-up menu which lists the lesson groups in that subject area. Clicking on the lesson group brings up a lesson menu showing the individual lessons in this topic. As you can see, an airplane flies down to the first lesson that has not been completed. In this case, since you're just starting, it's the first one, Forces on an Aircraft. If you want to take this lesson now, just click on that lesson title. When a lesson begins, you'll first see a preview screen that describes what you'll be learning. When the Proceed with Lesson button appears at the lower right corner of the screen, click on it to start your video lesson. While you're playing the video, you have complete control to pause or move anywhere in the video. In addition to using the video controls at the bottom, you can left-click anywhere on the video to pause it or to resume playing. If you click on the Stop button, it takes you completely out of the video and to the questions.
So the relationship in straight and level flight is lift is equal to weight.
Now, as soon as the video lesson is done, the first FAA question related to what you've just learned will appear. To answer that question, you simply click your mouse on your choice of the 3 possible responses. You'll get immediate feedback on how you did. If you skip some questions or miss some, at the end of the question series, the program will give you the option of retaking them. By placing your mouse over the buttons at the bottom of the screen, you'll see helpful descriptions of what those buttons do. For example, the Open Book opens a complete, detailed explanation for the answers to that question, why the correct answer is correct, and why the incorrect answers are not. And clicking on the TV replays the video lesson. Now, when you're in a lesson with problem-type questions, you'll be given one of each question type covered in that lesson. These questions involve charts, graphs, and/or multiple calculations that require several minutes to complete. So we have given you a representative example to take with that lesson, but there are additional similar questions that you can take in the question review. When you've watched the video and correctly answered all the questions in that lesson, the lesson title will turn green and you'll see the completion date. When you've completed all the lessons in a lesson group, the title on the pop-up menu will be checked off. When you've completed all the lesson groups in a subject, the subject icon changes color, giving you a quick visual way to track your progress. But even though an icon has changed color, you can still retake the subject anytime you want. Now the last picture icon is labeled How to Ace Your Test. This is where we give you hints and tips for getting the best score on your FAA knowledge test. When you finish the video lessons, if you want a Top Gun score, click on the question review icon to restudy all the questions and to practice for your computerized FAA knowledge test. On the question review menu, you'll find an icon labeled Answer Questions. In the Answer Questions section, you can review all of the questions in the FAA question bank in a number of different formats. These are the same FAA questions that followed your video lessons with the additional similar computation questions added. The category in orange is the one you currently have selected. Categories shown in green indicate that you have answered all the questions and answered them correctly. Categories shown in black mean either that you have some unanswered questions or have missed some. When you have completed the course, you will have already correctly answered most, although not all, of the questions in the question bank. To review the remaining unanswered questions, just click on the Answer Questions icon and choose the Unanswered Questions option. Now, if you want to restudy every FAA question, as many people do, you'll want to reset the question status to unanswered before you start the review. You do that by clicking on the Tools icon and choosing Reset Question Status. Doing this erases all your question scoring, but it does not erase your progress through the lessons. For now, we'll just cancel out. Again, the computer keeps track of each question you take and records the latest answer you've given for each question. The report card will give you an up-to-date assessment of your score by King category and overall. Your first screen after selecting report card shows, by the airplane's progress across the country, your progress through the question bank. Since you're not given every FAA question in the course phase, if you look at the report card right after you complete the video lessons, the little airplane will not fly all the way across the country because you've not yet taken all the FAA questions. With these two icons south of the border, you can view either a text or a bar graph report. Let's take a look at the text report. Any scores under the 70% passing level will be shown in red, so you would definitely want to study those areas further. And you can send either of these reports to the printer if you wish. By the way, if you have any problem with your computer, if the program won't advance or freezes up, you should be able to reset it by closing the entire program and restarting your computer. Then reopen the program and reindex the questions before you continue your study. You reindex by clicking on the Question Review icon, then the Tools icon, and selecting Reindex Questions. Now, when you're ready to see what an actual FAA exam will be like, click on the Practice Exams icon. You can choose from 3 pre-selected representative practice exams, or you can get an infinite number by selecting randomly generated exam. If you want to print out your practice exams and take them on paper instead of taking them on computer, you can select Questions to Paper Only. Since these practice tests on the computer simulate the real thing, you do not get correct or incorrect feedback and explanations while you're taking those questions. By the way, you can play these same DVDs on your set-top DVD player connected to your TV. If you do that, be sure and watch the Start Here segment again. It's different, and we'll show you how the system works on a DVD player for your TV as opposed to your computer. Now, if you do use the program on your TV, since there won't be a computer attached then, your progress through the course will not be recorded, and you'll only be able to view a few representative questions instead of the whole FAA question bank. Now let's briefly look at some important items you get in your King coursebook. First of all, you do not need to take notes during the video segments because we've already taken care of that for you, and you'll find those course notes in the front of your book. If a question requires a figure, in addition to viewing it on your screen, you may find it useful to go to the printed version in the back of your course book. There are also a number of very useful legend pages. This is also where you'll find the instructor's endorsement for taking the FAA knowledge test. You can either ask your own CFI to sign it, or we can fill it out after you send us your practice test, whatever's most convenient for you. When you have taken your FAA test, please pull out the blue postcard from the back of your King coursebook and mail it in to us with your comments. This is our report card. Your comments telling us how we did putting this course together are very important to us. And when we get your postcard, we'll send you your own personalized graduation certificate. And now you're ready to get the very best from your King Private Pilot DVD course with true interactivity.